world ether concept. To understand this is taken from aetux.com, aetux. The world ether concept. To understand this, let's transfer the experiment. Why the Michelson Morley experiment did not detect the ether wind. So to understand this, let's transfer the experiment to the aquatic environment. Imagine that your boat is spinning in a huge whirlpool. Try to detect the movement of the water in relation to the boat. You will not detect any movement, as the boat's speed will be equal to the speed of the water, replacing the boat with the earth in your imagination and the whirlpool with the ethereal tornado that revolves around the sun, yada yada. You will understand why Michelson-Morley experiment ended unsuccessfully in this author's opinion, not my opinion. In my research, his research, I always adhere to the principle that all phenomena in nature, in whatever physical environment they occur, always manifest themselves in the same way. Waves are in the water, in the air. The radio waves and light are waves in the air. Einstein's assertion that there is no ether is erroneous. It is difficult to imagine there are radio waves, but there is no ether, the physical medium that carries these waves. Einstein tries to explain the motion of light in the absence of ether with Planck's quantum hypothesis. I wonder how Einstein, with the existence of ether, can explain ball lightning. Einstein says that there is no ether, but he actually proves its existence. Take, for example, the speed of propagation of light. Einstein declares the speed of light does not depend on the speed of movement of the light source. And it is right. But this rule can exist only when the light source is a certain physical environment. Ether, which by its properties limits the speed of light. The substance of the ether limits the speed of light in the same way that the substance of air limits the speed of sound. If there was no ether, then the speed of light would strongly depend on the speed of movement of the light source. I'll read that part again. If there was no ether, then the speed of light would strongly depend on the speed of movement of the light source. Having understood what the ether is, I began to draw analogies between the phenomenon in water, in the air, and in the ether. And then an incident happened that helped me a lot in my research. Once I watched a sailor smoke a pipe. He blew smoke out of his mouth in small rings. The rings of tobacco smoke flew quite considerable distance before collapsing. Then I conducted a study of this phenomenon in water. Taking a metal can, I cut a small hole in the side and pulled a thin leather on the other side. After pouring some ink into the jar, I dipped it into the pool of water. When I sharply hit my skin with the fingers, ink rings flew out of the can, which crossed the entire pool and collided with the wall, collapsed, causing significant fluctuations in the water near the pool wall. At the same time, water in the pool remained completely calm. Yes, this is the transfer of energy, I exclaimed. It was like an inspiration. I suddenly realized what ball lightning is and how to transmit energy wirelessly over long distances. Based on this research, I created a generator that generated etheric vortex rings, which I called etheric vortex objects. This was a victory. I was in euphoria. It seemed to me that I could do anything. I promised a lot of things without fully investigating this phenomenon, and for this I paid dearly. They stopped giving me money for research, and the worst thing, they stopped believing me. Euphoria gave way to deep depression, and I then decided on my crazy experiment. The mystery of the invention will die with me. After my failures, I became more restrained in promises. Working with ethereal vortex objects, I realized that they do not behave exactly as I thought before. It turned out that when vortex objects passed near metal objects, they lost their energy and collapsed, sometimes with an explosion. The deep layers of Earth absorbed the energy as strongly as the metal. Therefore, I could only transmit energy over short distances. Then I turned my attention to the moon. If you send ethereal vortex objects to the moon, they being reflected from the electrostatic field, will return back to Earth at a considerable distance from the transmitter. Since the angle of the incidence is equal to the angle of the reflection, energy can be transmitted over long distances, even to the other side of the Earth. I have carried out several experiments transferring energy towards the moon. In the course of these experiments, it turned out that the Earth is surrounded by an electric field. This field destroyed weak vortex objects. Ethereal vortex objects possessing great energy broke through the electric field of the Earth and went into interplanetary space. Oh, God. And then the thought occurred to me that if I can create a resonance system between the Earth and the moon, then the transmitter power can be very small and the energy from the system can be extracted very large. After calculating how much energy can be extracted, I was surprised. From the calculation, it followed that the energy extracted from the system is sufficient to completely destroy a large city. Then I realized for the first time that my system would be dangerous for humanity. Still, I really wanted to conduct my own experiment. Unbeknownst to others, I began a thorough preparation of my insane experiment. First of all, I had to choose a place for the experiment, and the Arctic was the best suited for me. This is where no people were, and I couldn't hurt anyone, but the calculations showed that the current position of the moon, an ethereal vortex object, can hit Siberia. And people could live there. And people could be living there, I suppose. I went to the library and began studying information about Siberia. And there was little information, but I still realized that there are almost no people in Siberia. I had to keep my experiment in deep secrecy. Other than consequences for me and all mankind could be very unpleasant. One question always tormented me. Will my discoveries be for the good of the people? After all, it had long been known that the people used all inventions to exterminate their own kind. This guy is some sort of La La Land visitor. It happened a lot. He's definitely not red-pilled. It happened a lot to keep my secret. It helped a lot to keep my secret that much of the equipment in my laboratory had been dismantled by that time. However, I was able to save what I needed for the experiment. From this equipment, I single-handedly assembled a new transmitter and connected it to the emitter, experimenting with the amount of energy that could be dangerous. If I am wrong in my calculations, then the energy of the etheric vortex object will hit the opposite direction. Therefore, I was not in the laboratory, but 2 miles from it. The work of my installation was controlled by a clockwork. The principle of the experiment was very simple. In order to better understand it, you must first understand what ethereal vortex object and ball lightning are. Basically, they are the same thing. The only difference is that ball lightning is an ethereal vortex object that's visible. The visibility of ball lightning is provided by large electrostatic charge. This can be compared to the ink tint of the water vortex rings in my swimming pool experiment. Passing through the electrostatic field, the ethereal vortex object captures charged particles in it, which cause the glow of ball lightning. To create a resonance system Earth-Moon, it was necessary to create a large concentration of charged particles between the Earth and the Moon. For this, I used the property of ethereal vortex objects to capture the transferred charged particles. Etheric vortex objects were emitted by the generator towards the moon. They passed through the electric field of the Earth, captured charged particles in it. Since the electrostatic field of the moon has the same polarity as the electric field of the Earth, Ethereal vortex objects were reflected from it and again went to the Earth, but at a different angle. So this guy's living on a ball Earth still, but he's trying to explain away ethereal vortex objects. Returning to the Earth, the ethereal vortex objects were again reflected by the Earth's electric field back to the Moon, and so on. Thus, charged particles were pumped into the resonance system Earth-Moon electric field. When the required concentration of charged particles was reached in the resonance system, it was self-excited at the resonant frequency. The energy amplified 1,000,000 times by the resonant properties of the system, and the electric field of the Earth was transformed into an ethereal vortex object of colossal power. But these were only my assumptions, and how it could actually be, I do not know. I remember the day of the experiment very well. The estimated time was approaching. The minutes passed very slowly and seemed like years. I thought I would go crazy with this expectation. Finally, the estimated time came and nothing happened. Another 5 minutes passed and nothing unusual happened. Various thoughts entered my head. Maybe the clock didn't work, or the system didn't work, or maybe nothing should happen. I was on the verge of insanity. Suddenly, it seemed to me that the light faded for a moment, and a strange sensation appeared in my whole body, as if thousands of needles had struck into me. It was over soon, but there was an unpleasant metallic taste in my mouth. All of my muscles relaxed, and my head was buzzing. I felt completely overwhelmed. When I returned to my laboratory, I found it almost intact. There was only a strong smell of burning in the air. I was again possessed by an agonizing expectation because I did not know the results of my experiment. And only later, after reading about unusual phenomenon in the newspapers, I realized what a terrible weapon I had created. Of course, expected that there would be a violent explosion, but it wasn't even an explosion. It was a disaster. After this experiment, I firmly decided that the secret of my invention will die with me. Of course, I realized that someone else could easily repeat this crazy experiment, but for this it was necessary to recognize the existence of ether, and our scientific world more and more drifted away from the truth. I am even grateful to Einstein and others for the fact that their erroneous theories, they led humanity away from this dangerous path along which I was walking. And maybe this is their main merit. Maybe in 100 years, when the mind of people prevails over animal instincts, my invention will benefit people. While working with my generator, I noticed one strange phenomenon. When it was turned on, a breeze was clearly felt blowing toward the generator. At first I thought it was due to electrostatics. Then I decided to check it out. Rolling several newspapers together, I lit and immediately extinguished them. Sorry for the choppiness, it's I must have been translated. Thick smoke poured from the newspapers. With these smoking newspapers, I walked around the generator. From any point in the laboratory, smoke went to the generator and, rising above it, went up like into a chimney. When the generator was turned off, this phenomenon was not observed any longer. Having considered this phenomenon, I came to the conclusion my generator acting on the ether reduces the force of gravity. To verify this, I built a large scale. I'm just reading it verbatim. I'm sorry if it doesn't make a lot of sense. One side of the balance was located above the generator. I have to check to make sure I'm still recording again. Looks like we're good. Then thick smoke newspapers Having considered this phenomenon, I came to the conclusion my generator was acting on the ether, reduces the force of gravity. To verify this, I built a large scale. The one side of the balance was located above the generator, to exclude the electromagnetic influencer of the generator. The scales were made of well-dried wood. Having carefully balanced the scales, I turned on the generator with great excitement. The side of the balance, which was located above the generator, quickly went up. I automatically turned off the generator. The scales went down and began to oscillate until they came into balance. It was like a trick. I loaded the scales with ballast and, by changing the power and operating mode of the generator, I achieved their balance. After these experiments, I decided to build a flying machine that could fly not only in air but also in space, if you believe in such a thing. The principle of operation of this machine is as follows. The generator installed on the flying machine removes ether in the direction of its flight. Since the ether continues to press with the same force from all other sides, the flying machine will begin to move. Being in such a car, you will not feel acceleration since the ether will not interfere with your movement. Unfortunately, I had to abandon the creation of flying machines. This happened for two reasons. First, I had no money to carry out the works secretly, but most importantly, a big war has begun in Europe, and I don't want my invention to be killed. When will these madmen stop? Presumably.